The office atrium felt like a freezer, the cold air blasting from the vents above making me shiver as I clutched my red spiral notebook against my chest. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, my knuckles white from gripping it so tight. I stared at the glass wall where HR always posted the separation notices, watching a piece of paper flutter in the harsh breeze from the air conditioning. My name is Jasmine Cooper, and just an hour ago, I was officially fired. The reason? I refused to work an entire weekend without pay. If something like this has ever happened to you, please tell me where you're listening from, because the story I'm about to share will truly blow your mind. The crowd of my former coworkers around me whispered and pointed at the notices. Some people shook their heads in quiet disbelief, while others just looked plain scared, their eyes wide like they were wondering if they would be next. My termination letter was right there, pinned for everyone to see, a public humiliation. I gripped my notebook even tighter, feeling the coiled wire of the binding dig into my palm. Inside were pages and pages of notes, a collection of evidence that I knew would eventually destroy the man who fired me. He thought he was so smart, demanding free labor from all of us, hiding behind his fancy title. Manager Bill had no idea what was coming for him, the storm that was about to hit. My footsteps echoed on the polished floor as I walked toward the main exit, the only one leaving this early in the day. The security guards watched me like hawks, their arms crossed, making sure I didn't cause any trouble on my way out. But the real trouble, the kind that would bring this whole department to its knees, was only just beginning. I stopped at the heavy glass doors, the sunlight warm on my face, and turned back for one last look at the place I had given 5 years of my life to. Soon, I promised myself, everyone in this building would know the ugly truth about what really happened here. It all started on a Friday evening just 3 weeks ago. Those awful fluorescent lights were buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry wasps, a sound I usually ignored but now felt amplified. I was zipping up my worn laptop bag, my body and mind exhausted, but ready to finally go home after another brutally long week, when he appeared at my desk like a storm cloud blocking the sun. Manager Bill stood there, his suit perfectly pressed, his expression unreadable. "I need you to come in this weekend and finish the backlog for the quarterly report," he said. His voice was completely flat and cold, devoid of any emotion, like he was ordering a coffee instead of demanding my entire free time. I looked up from my desk, my tired mind struggling to process his words. I was so surprised I just asked the first logical question that came to my mind. "Will I be paid overtime for the weekend work?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. His whole face transformed in an instant. His jaw tightened into a hard line and his eyes went dark, the friendly mask slipping away to reveal something much colder underneath. My simple, reasonable question seemed to offend him on a deep level. He crossed his arms over his chest, making himself look bigger, and stared down at me like I was a bug. "Loyal employees don't ask for pay," he said slowly, letting each word sink in like a separate, stinging slap. "Be a good employee for once, Jasmine, and just do what needs to be done." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless. For once, I had never been late, never missed a single deadline, never caused any problems for anyone. My work record was absolutely spotless. How dare he question my loyalty, my dedication? Other people in the nearby cubicles suddenly became very interested in their screens, pretending not to listen, but I could feel their eyes on us, their nervous energy filling the air. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how I would respond to this blatant power play. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I realized with sickening clarity that this was a test. And it was a test I was about to fail spectacularly. The parking garage was dim, cold, and eerily quiet, the only sound, the distant drip of water from a pipe. I leaned heavily against the side of my old sedan, the metal cool against my back, and replayed his words in my head over and over. "Be a good employee for once." The phrase burned in my mind like acid, eating away at my composure. What had I ever done to deserve that kind of cruel public treatment? I thought about all the late nights I had voluntarily stayed to finish projects, the times I had quietly covered for sick coworkers without a single complaint, all the extra miles I had gone without ever asking for anything in return. Being called disloyal, especially in front of my peers, stung worse than any other insult I could imagine. It felt like a knife twisting deep in my chest, a profound betrayal. I had given this company my energy, my time, my best ideas, and this was the thanks I got? A demand for more free labor and a character assassination when I questioned it? The cold, damp air bit at my cheeks as I stood there, but a new, hot feeling was growing in my stomach, a fierce, determined anger. I made a decision right then that would change everything. I was not going to let him walk all over me anymore. I was not going to be his or anyone else's free labor. I was a person, not a resource to be exploited. I unlocked my car with a sharp click that echoed in the concrete space and slid into the driver's seat, not starting the engine, just sitting in the silence and staring at the stained ceiling. Tomorrow was Saturday, and for the first time since I started this job, I would not be feeling guilty for not going into the office. I decided right then, my breath still making little puffs in the cold air. I wasn't going to be exploited. It was a line in the sand. Monday morning, the office kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and a general sense of disappointment. I was rinsing out my chipped white mug under the weak, lukewarm faucet, trying to wash away the lingering stress of the weekend. I had enjoyed my 2 days off, but a low-level anxiety had been humming under my skin the whole time. Around me, my coworkers moved like zombies, their shoulders slumped, their faces pale and etched with a deep exhaustion that a weekend should have cured. Nobody was making eye contact or engaging in the usual cheerful small talk about their weekends. The usual Monday morning buzz was completely gone, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. Something was very wrong. I strained my ears and caught the faint whispers near the coffee machine. "Did you get the weekend invite?" One person, Sarah from accounting, asked quietly. "Yeah, but I couldn't say no." Another, Quincy from Quincy Eating, replied, his voice low and strained. He made it pretty clear it would directly affect our performance reviews. My stomach instantly twisted into a hard, cold knot of dread. Weekend invites? What were they talking about? I hadn't received any invitation to work over the weekend. I had checked my email, relieved to find nothing, and had enjoyed my freedom. More hushed voices joined the grim conversation. "I was there until almost 10 on Sunday night," a third person added. "My kids were so disappointed I missed their soccer game." Another voice, weary and defeated, chimed in. "At least we're showing commitment, right? That's gotta count for something." The awful, gut-wrenching reality finally hit me. While I was at home reading a book and watching movies, my coworkers had been forced, pressured, or scared into coming to the office and working for free. Bill hadn't just targeted me with his illegal demand. He had done it to everyone. My hands began to shake as I filled my mug with the bitter black coffee. I needed to get back to my desk. I needed to check something immediately. Back at my desk, the partition walls feeling like they were closing in, I opened my laptop with fingers that trembled against the keys. The screen glowed an accusing blue as I quickly clicked on the company calendar icon, my heart hammering a frantic, nervous beat against my ribs. I held my breath as the page loaded, the little spinning wheel feeling like it took an eternity. And then I saw them. New meeting entries, scattered across my calendar for the past Saturday and Sunday, like poisonous weeds. Each one had the same strange clinical title: Weekend Sprint, Delete After Completion. The meetings were scheduled during the middle of the day on Saturday, and again on Sunday, times when normal people should be resting, with their families, living their lives. My chest felt hollow, like someone had reached in and scooped out all my insides with a cold spoon. These weren't friendly requests or optional team-building exercises. They were commands, direct orders disguised as neutral calendar invites. I scrolled through the details of each meeting, my horror growing with every line. Mandatory attendance for all department staff. Business-critical work for Q4 restructuring. Department headcount and role continuity depends on successful completion. The language was deliberately scary, designed to intimidate and bully us into compliance without question. The absolute worst part, the part that made my blood run cold, was the clear instruction typed at the bottom. Please delete this calendar entry after the meeting to maintain calendar clarity. Bill wasn't just asking for unpaid work. He was actively, intentionally trying to erase the digital evidence of his forced, unpaid labor scheme. He knew what he was doing was wrong, and he knew it was probably illegal. With a surge of adrenaline, I immediately began taking screenshots of everything. My phone camera clicked quietly, steadily, as I captured each calendar entry, making sure the timestamps, the threatening wording, and the delete instructions were all perfectly clear in the images. That evening, at home, my personal printer hummed and whirred as it spit out page after page of these digital proofs. I carefully organized each one in a simple folder I had labeled Weekend Work. Deep in my gut, I had a powerful, chilling feeling that I was going to need all the proof I could get. Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed insistently on the kitchen counter while I was waiting for my tea kettle to scream. The sound was unnaturally loud in the quiet of my apartment. I picked it up and saw the notification from the company-wide group chat. My blood went cold as I read the latest message from Bill, sent just moments ago. Team, I hope you all showed your true commitment and drive this past weekend. It's the kind of dedication that separates the good from the great. I look forward to seeing that same energy reflected in the week ahead. The message was followed by a parade of forced, utterly fake emoji reactions. Thumbs up, heart eyes, clapping hands. A digital performance of enthusiasm that was entirely coerced, all from coworkers who had no real choice but to pretend they were happy about being exploited. I scrolled slowly through the string of replies, my disgust growing with each one. Absolutely, sir. Can't wait to crush our goals this week. Always happy to go the extra mile for the team. Team first. It was a productive weekend. Every single message reeked of fake enthusiasm and the hidden, sour fear of retaliation. They were performing for their jobs, for their livelihoods. Then my phone buzzed again, this time with a private message. It was from Jenny, who sat at the desk next to mine. She had sent me a single, grainy photo, and it made my stomach drop down to my feet. The picture showed our office, lit by the harsh, unnatural glow of fluorescent lights on a Sunday evening. Dozens of people were hunched over their computers, their postures slumped in defeat, their faces pale and exhausted. The desks were a mess of empty coffee cups, crumpled food wrappers, and the general detritus of a long, unpaid, and forced work session. Mandatory fun. Jenny had written under the photo, the sarcasm a thin veil for the pain and resentment I could feel radiating from the image. I stared at it for a long, long time, my tea forgotten. While I was enjoying my weekend freedom, my friends, my colleagues, were trapped in a form of corporate slavery, their personal lives sacrificed for a manager's power trip. Bill was systematically turning us all against each other, making loyalty a brutal competition instead of a genuine, mutual choice. Sunday morning sunlight streamed through my bedroom curtains, painting warm, golden rectangles on the opposite wall. I should have felt peaceful, relaxed, but my phone kept buzzing on the nightstand, each vibration sending a jolt of anger through me. The messages were from a different, secret group chat, one Bill wasn't in, where people were venting their frustration. I got out of bed, the cozy feeling gone, and went straight to my laptop at the small desk in the corner. I opened a new folder and named it Bill's Threats. Then I started the meticulous work of saving every text and message Bill had ever sent me that related to weekend work. Each message was worse than the last, building a devastating case against him without him having a single clue. True team players show up when they are needed most. Don't be the one who lets the entire department down. Your dedication, or lack thereof, will be specifically noted in your quarterly performance review. Each text was a thinly veiled threat, carefully wrapped in corporate speak, designed to sound motivational, but carrying the weight of a job threat. The final message he had sent me the previous Friday was the one that made me highlight the text in bright, glaring red on my screen. If you can't be counted on when it matters, then don't bother coming in on Monday. My pulse thundered in my ears as I read those 10 words over and over again. He was explicitly threatening to fire anyone who didn't submit to his demand for free labor. The audacity of it was breathtaking, a clear case of retaliation. I saved the message as its own separate file, labeling it Evidence A, Direct Threat. Then I leaned back in my chair, the early morning light now feeling harsh. Bill thought he held all the power, that his position made him untouchable. But he was dangerously wrong. Every threatening text, every manipulative message, every illegal demand was another brick I was collecting, and I was building a wall that was about to trap him completely. My printer soon hummed to life, adding the text conversation thread to my now significant paper file. The folder was satisfyingly thick. Soon I would have everything I needed to bring his little empire crashing down. Monday morning, the elevator hummed its familiar, monotonous tune as it carried me up to the floor where I would face whatever punishment Bill had planned for me. I wiped my sweaty palms on the fabric of my skirt and tried to steady my breathing, but the air felt thick and heavy. The reflective metal walls of the elevator seemed to be closing in, showing me a distorted version of my own nervous face. The doors slid open with a soft, mocking ding, and I stepped out into the office. And there he was. Manager Bill was already standing right by my desk, his arms folded tightly across his chest, his expression cold and calculating. He had been waiting for me. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was calm, clear, and carried across the suddenly quiet office, making sure every single person heard his not-so-subtle threat. "We'll remember who showed up this weekend," he stated flatly, not even blinking as he held my gaze. "We always remember who the real team players are." Around me, the few coworkers who had already arrived kept their heads bowed low over their keyboards, their typing suddenly very intense. Nobody dared to look up. Nobody wanted to be the next target of his displeasure. The whole floor felt electrically tense, thick with a fear you could almost taste. I walked the long walk to my desk, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. It felt like I was walking the plank, heading straight for my professional execution. My chair, my familiar, padded office chair, felt foreign and uncomfortable, like it didn't belong to me anymore. Everything in the space, my monitor, my pen holder, my little succulent plant, seemed different, tainted, and dangerous. Bill didn't move a muscle. He just stood there, a statue of corporate authority, watching me with those flat, cold eyes, making absolutely sure I understood my place at the very bottom of his twisted hierarchy. My desk, my own workspace, suddenly felt like borrowed space, like I was a guest who had long overstayed her welcome. The feeling was so powerful it made my skin crawl with a deep, unsettling dread. I sat down slowly and pressed the power button on my computer, the fan whirring to life, but I could still feel the weight of his stare burning into the back of my head. The message was received, loud and clear: conform completely, or be destroyed. The conference room smelled overwhelmingly like stale pastries and broken dreams. Bill had summoned me for what he called a performance discussion. But I knew, with a sick certainty in my gut, that this was really an ambush. The overly bright fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly overhead, a sound that was already grating on my frayed nerves. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. He simply slid a thick packet of papers across the shiny, polished table towards me. Performance Improvement Plan, the cover read in stark, bold black letters. My stomach dropped like a stone, a cold wave of nausea washing over me. "This is effective immediately," he said, his voice dripping with a fake, syrupy concern that made me want to shudder. "We need to address some very concerning patterns we're seeing in your work ethic and overall commitment." My hands were trembling slightly as I flipped through the pages, feeling sicker with each line I read. Failure to demonstrate team commitment during critical business periods. Reluctance to exceed basic job requirements when the company needs you most. Questionable dedication to core company values, specifically teamwork and accountability. Every single accusation was a direct, twisted reference to my refusal to work the unpaid weekends. He was meticulously, deliberately documenting a fake paper trail, creating a narrative of failure to legally justify firing me. My eyes caught the date on the plan, and a fresh wave of anger surged through me. It was dated this past Saturday. He had written this formal reprimand, this list of my supposed failures, while my coworkers were slaving away for free in the office. Behind Bill's shoulder, I could see the large wall clock. Its red second hand swept smoothly around the white face, quincying the irreversible passage of time. Trying to keep my movements casual, I discreetly pulled my phone from my pocket, angled it just right, and snapped a quick, silent photo of the first page of the document with the clock perfectly visible in the background. The timestamp would prove, beyond any doubt, that he had created this punitive document on a weekend, the very same weekend he was demanding I work for free. "Do you have any questions about the process?" he asked, a smug, triumphant little smile playing on his lips, believing he had already won. I had a million questions, a storm of protests and accusations, but I swallowed them all down, locking them away for a later, more important audience. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "No questions." Back at my desk, the office was a cacophony of normal sounds, printers chattering, phones ringing, the low murmur of conversations, but all I could hear was the frantic, pounding rhythm of my own heartbeat. The performance improvement plan sat squarely on my keyboard, a bright yellow packet of doom that felt like a professional death sentence. My hands were still shaking as I picked up my chipped white coffee mug, the warmth doing nothing to calm the ice in my veins. Bill appeared at my desk again almost immediately, like a bad Leah that just kept turning up, drawn by the scent of his perceived victory. He leaned casually against my cubicle wall, invading my personal space, making himself comfortable in my small designated area. "So, Jasmine," he began, drawing out my name, clearly savoring this moment of total control. "I trust you now fully understand what needs to change around here. The expectations are very clear." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, then looked up at him, meeting his gaze with what I hoped were steady, unflinching eyes. "I understand the expectations perfectly," I said, my voice soft but clear enough for the nearby desks to hear. "But my position remains the same. I will not work unpaid weekends. What you're demanding is wage theft, and it is illegal." His face instantly twisted with raw, unfiltered anger. The mask of fake professional concern slipped completely away, revealing the petty, vindictive bully that had been hiding underneath all along. He leaned forward and tapped his knuckles sharply on my desk twice. Rap, rap. A sound that made me flinch and echoed in the sudden quiet that had fallen around us. "We'll see about that," he hissed through gritted teeth, his voice low and dangerous. Within minutes of him storming away, a new meeting invite popped into my email inbox with a jarring ping. The subject line read, "Final Alignment Discussion, Monday 9 a.m. The words were polite, corporate, but the unspoken threat behind them was as obvious as a slap in the face. This was it. The final meeting before the axe fell. I didn't hesitate. I immediately forwarded the invite to my secure personal email account. Everything Bill did, every move he made, was becoming another piece of evidence for my case, whether he realized it or not. I took another sip of my coffee, the bitter taste matching my mood, and tried to look calm, but inside, my mind was already racing, planning my next move with a cold, sharp clarity. The final alignment was coming. All right, but not in the way Manager Bill expected. The Human Resources Department smelled strongly of lavender air freshener, an attempt to be calming that mixed sickeningly with the scent of old carpet, and I thought, broken dreams. The combination made my already nervous stomach turn. I sat stiffly in a plush chair across from HR Director Barnes, a woman with a perpetually neutral expression. Bill lurked in the corner of the small, windowless room like a grim shadow, his arms crossed, refusing to look directly at me. "The company has decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately, due to failure to support critical business needs and an inability to meet the standards outlined in your performance improvement plan." Barnes read from a prepared script on her tablet. Her voice was completely flat and emotionless, as if she were reading off grocery prices instead of dismantling someone's livelihood. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. There was no point. Instead, I slowly, deliberately, placed my employee badge and my office keys on the polished wooden table between us. The soft click of the plastic and metal against the wood echoed in the tense, quiet room like a gunshot. Bill studied a framed generic landscape print on the wall behind my head, a coward unwilling to witness the direct consequence of his actions. "Your final paycheck will be processed according to standard company policy," Barnes continued, her eyes still glued to her screen. "You will receive the formal termination paperwork and information about continuing your health insurance via email within the hour." I stood up slowly, my legs feeling weak and shaky, threatening to buckle. This was really happening. After 5 years of loyal service, of going above and beyond, they were throwing me away like yesterday's trash, all because I had stood up for my basic rights. "Is there anything you'd like to say before you go?" Barnes asked, likely expecting me to break down, to plead for my job back, to promise I'd work every weekend for free if they just kept me. I turned my head and looked directly at Bill, forcing him into my line of sight. His eyes flickered towards me for a split second before darting away again. "I have plenty to say," I told him, my voice quiet but firm, laced with a steel he had never heard from me before. "But I'll save it for the right audience." His face went a shade paler, but he still wouldn't meet my gaze, confirming everything I already knew about his character. Outside the sleek office building, the city was alive with its usual chaotic symphony. Car horns blared, sirens wailed in the distance, and thousands of people rushed along the sidewalks to their own jobs, their own problems. The urban noise surrounded me, but I felt completely detached from it, wrapped in a bubble of shock and anger. I hugged the single cardboard box against my chest, the contents feeling pitifully light. Inside were the sad remaining artifacts of my corporate life. My chipped, World's Best Boss coffee mug, a gift from my team last year, my trusted red notebook, now filled with secrets, and a faded photo strip from last year's cheesy team-building lunch. My employee badge was gone, cut into pieces by Barnes and thrown into her trash can, as if my 5 years of service had never mattered, as if I had never mattered. People streamed past me on the sidewalk, their faces set in determined masks, their minds already on their next meeting, their next task. Nobody even glanced at the woman in the business suit clutching a cardboard box of broken dreams. I was invisible, just another casualty of corporate greed and a manager's fragile ego. I managed to hold myself together until I reached the relative privacy of my car. I shoved the box onto the passenger seat, where it sat like a silent accusation, and then the tears came. They were hot, fast, and blurry, fueled by a potent mix of humiliation, fury, and fear for the future. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel and let them fall. But as I sat there, in the dim garage, something shifted inside me. The hot tears of self-pity began to cool, solidifying into something much harder, much stronger. A cold, diamond-hard determination. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, my tears had dried, and my jaw was set in a firm, resolute line. I carried the box inside and set it down on my kitchen counter. I didn't put the items away. I left them there as a reminder. Then I opened my laptop, the screen glowing to life in the dim apartment. I created a new folder on my desktop and gave it a name that made a small, grim smile touch my lips for the first time all day. Case file, Bill. The real work, the most important work of my career, was just beginning. My laptop fan rattled noisily in the quiet of my apartment, the only sound in the deep silence of the night. I had waited until now, certain that my access would soon be revoked. With a deep breath, I logged into the company portal one last time and opened my work calendar. The ghostly entries for the weekend tasks still glowed on the screen. Each weekend sprint, delete after, meeting a smoking gun that Bill never knew I had preserved. I connected my personal external hard drive, the one labeled pay-proof in bold black quinceair, and began dragging and dropping everything into a new folder. Screenshots, calendar entries, email threads from my personal account, all of it was systematically copied onto the drive. The files transferred with a slow, satisfying progress bar, giving me time to think, to plan. Bill thought he was so clever, using that delete after command to erase the digital trail of his illegal demands. But he had forgotten, or more likely never considered, that smart employees make backups. Employees who have been pushed too far become dangerously meticulous. I opened my screen recording software and began a new session. I slowly, deliberately scrolled through the entire calendar, zooming in on the damning entries, making sure the mouse hovered over the dates and the delete after instructions. The video would prove this was not fabricated, that this was the genuine, unaltered company system. Any lawyer, any judge would see this as undeniable proof of systematic wage theft. When the transfer was complete, I safely ejected the hard drive and held the small black device in my palm, its weight feeling significant. This little piece of technology contained enough evidence to not only get my job back, but to destroy Bill's career and reputation. He had handed me the very weapons I needed to fight back, all wrapped up in his own staggering arrogance. On my physical desk, next to my laptop, I kept a handwritten checklist. I picked up a pen and put a firm check Quincy next to the first 3 items. Texts, calendar photos, screen recording. The next items on the list, witness statements, management evidence, legal contact, would be harder, riskier to get. But I was just getting started. Bill had spent the last year teaching me to be thorough, to document everything, to cover all my bases. It was time to use his own lessons against him. The apartment was dark except for the cool blue glow of my laptop screen, the only light source in the room. I opened my red notebook to a fresh blank page and picked up my favorite pen. Then I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and began the painstaking process of writing down everything I could remember from Monday's termination meeting. It was like hitting play on a perfect recording in my mind. Each word, each gesture, each subtle shift in tone came back to me with crystal clarity. We'll remember who showed up this weekend. I wrote Bill's exact threatening words in my careful, neat handwriting, underlining them twice. The menace in that statement was clear, even if he thought he was being clever and subtle. I documented Barnes's robotic recitation of the script about business needs and performance standards. I described the way Bill had avoided all eye contact, his gaze fixed on the wall, his body language screaming of his guilt and cowardice. I noted the prepared, almost rehearsed nature of my termination, how the paperwork was already filled out, how there was no discussion, no chance for me to defend myself. My hand began to cramp from writing so intently, but I didn't stop. I knew that human memory fades and changes over time. But written records, made in the immediate aftermath, last forever. They carry weight. If this case ever went to court or to a formal labor board hearing, I wanted to remember everything exactly as it happened, with no room for doubt or fuzzy details. I went back through my notes and underlined the most damaging quotes in bright red ink. Bill's not-so-veiled threat about remembering who showed up, his repeated demand for loyalty without compensation, his admission in the conference room that the weekend work was mandatory for the restructure. Each sentence was another nail in the coffin he was building for himself. He had been so confident, so sure of his power and his untouchable position. Corporate bullies always are. They never expect the quiet ones to fight back so hard, so intelligently. My notebook filled with page after page of detailed evidence, a chronological account of his misconduct. By the time the first hints of dawn painted the sky gray outside my window, I had documented every illegal error, unethical thing Bill had done or said. The case wasn't just building, it was now a fortress. The coffee shop near my apartment smelled wonderfully of cinnamon, roasted beans, and fresh hope, a stark contrast to the stale office air I was used to. I sat at a small corner table across from my former coworker, Leah, who kept nervously glancing around the room, her eyes darting towards the door every time the bell chimed, as if she expected Bill himself to walk in at any moment. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted her latte to her lips. He pulled me aside on Friday and said if I didn't come in on Saturday, he would have to Quincy me down on my performance rating, she whispered, leaning in close. I have 3 kids at home, Jasmine. My husband was out of town. I had to call my mom to watch them, but I can't afford to lose this job. I just can't. Her eyes were wide with a fear I recognized all too well. Another former colleague, Leonard, who had slipped in quietly and joined us, nodded vigorously, his own eyes wide with a similar fright. Same thing happened to me, almost word for word. He said the weekend work was voluntary in spirit, but then made it crystal clear, off the record, that our jobs and any future promotions depended on us being visible and present. I pulled out my trusted red notebook and a pen, and with their permission I began to write down their exact words, their specific stories. These weren't just rumors or complaints. They were first-hand witness statements, testimony to Bill's pattern of retaliation and intimidation. Bill hadn't just threatened me, he had threatened multiple employees with professional ruin for refusing to work without pay. There's something else, Leah said, her voice dropping even lower as she glanced around one more time. There's a private Slack thread in the manager's channel. He didn't think any of us peons could see it, but someone in IT figured out a backdoor view. My pulse quickened, a jolt of adrenaline shooting through me. A management-only Slack thread? that could contain Bill's unfiltered, honest thoughts about his whole illegal scheme. If he had admitted to the wage theft in writing, even in what he thought was a private space, the case would be airtight, unbreakable. Leonard pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "Look at this," he said, his voice tight with anger, as he turned the phone to show me. What I saw on that screen made my mouth go completely dry with shock. It was even worse than I had imagined. It was past midnight. My room was so quiet I could hear the steady whir of my laptop fan like a constant companion. The Slack thread that Leonard had forwarded to me finally finished loading on my screen. I started reading, and with each new message, my blood ran colder, my heart hardening in my chest. If they start expecting actual pay for weekend work, then they're clearly not loyal enough to be considered for promotion, Bill had written to the other department managers. The message was time-stamped during normal work hours on a Thursday, sent blatantly from his official company account. I scrolled down, my eyes wide, taking screenshot after screenshot. Keep the overtime budget completely locked down. The key is to make them think it's about team spirit and commitment, not about money. Frame it as a privilege. My stomach churned. Then another message, even more damning. Anyone who refuses weekend duty needs to be formally documented for performance issues. Start the PIP process immediately. We need to make examples of the troublemakers first, so the others fall neatly into line. The worst one, the one that felt like a physical blow, came near the end of the thread. We need to fire the main troublemakers first. Use them as an example so the others understand the consequences and fall in line. It's the only way to maintain control. My hands trembled, not with fear now, but with a pure white-hot rage. Bill hadn't just been carelessly stealing wages. He had been conspiring, organizing with other managers in a deliberate, intentional cover-up of systematic, large-scale wage theft. This was organized crime, just in a corporate setting. I immediately opened a new email, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I attached every single screenshot, every piece of evidence I had gathered so far. I typed the email address of a prominent labor attorney I had researched, a woman known for taking on tough cases against big corporations. The email went out at 12:47 a.m., and I made sure the subject line was impossible to ignore. Urgent, smoking gun evidence of systematic wage theft and retaliation at Mega Dynamics. I clicked send, the whooshing sound a symbol of the point of no return being crossed. Almost immediately, my laptop chimed softly with an auto-reply from the law firm's server. "Thank you for your submission. We have received your message and will review the details. A member of our team will respond within 24 hours. I leaned back, the tension in my shoulders easing just a fraction. Bill thought he was the smartest person in the room, but his own arrogance and carelessness had just handed me everything I needed to destroy him completely. The public library was a sanctuary of quiet, smelling wonderfully of old paper, polished wood, and faintly of lemon-scented cleaning solution. I had spread my documents across a large, isolated table in a quiet corner, creating a command center for my one-woman war. Other patrons worked on their own projects, students studying, older people reading newspapers, completely unaware that the woman nearby was quietly building a case that would soon shake a local corporate giant. I pulled out a fresh piece of paper and began drawing a detailed flowchart of the company's hierarchy. I started with Bill at the bottom, then drew lines up to his boss, regional manager Carl, and then further up to corporate VP Thompson. But my chart didn't stop there. Above them, in a separate box of authority, I listed my new allies, the State Labor Board, the Corporate Ethics Hotline, and the Unemployment Office. Each of these government agencies had a different role to play, a different lever of power I could pull. I began the meticulous work of researching each one. The library's free Wi-Fi and public computers became my tools. I researched the specific forms needed to file a formal wage theft complaint with the Labor Board. I noted down the strict deadlines and the specific types of evidence they required to be successful. I found the anonymous hotline for reporting corporate misconduct and learned what information they would need to launch an internal investigation. I researched the process for filing for unemployment, specifically under the circumstances of being fired for refusing to do something illegal, which would make me likely eligible, and put another official inquiry onto the company's record. My notebook soon filled with phone numbers, email addresses, filing procedures, and case numbers. This wasn't just about getting revenge anymore. It was about following the law, using the proper channels, and doing everything by the book to ensure justice was served, not just for me, but for everyone Bill had exploited. By the time the library's closing announcement came over the intercom, I had a complete step-by-step roadmap for taking down Manager Bill through official, legal channels. He had the entire corporate machine behind him, but I had something much more powerful. The actual law on my side. I packed up my papers with a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. Tomorrow, I would start making the calls. Bill had spent the last year teaching me to be methodical, thorough, and detail-oriented. Now I would use every single one of those skills against him. The quiet co-working space I had rented for the day buzzed with a positive, creative energy, a world away from the oppressive atmosphere of my old office. Freelancers and remote workers tapped away at their laptops around me, pursuing their own dreams. I found an empty booth in a corner, opened my laptop, and connected to the secure Wi-Fi. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment as I took a steadying breath. Then I began to compose the most important email of my entire career. I addressed it directly to Mr. Bill's company email. I kept my tone perfectly professional, polite, and completely neutral, giving away no hint of the storm that was gathering. "Dear Mr. Bill," I typed, my keystrokes firm and decisive. "Could you please confirm for me in writing, for my personal records, whether the weekend work hours you have been scheduling are paid at the standard overtime rate, or if they are considered unpaid, voluntary work? I want to make absolutely certain I understand the official company policy correctly." It was a simple, reasonable question, the kind any diligent employee might ask. But it was a trap, and I was laying it out in the open. I deliberately copied my labor attorney, Miss Martins, on the email as a blind carbon copy recipient. She would get a copy, but Bill wouldn't see her name. Whatever he replied with, whether he admitted the work was unpaid or lied and said it was paid, would become a central piece of evidence in my formal case. If he admitted it, he was confessing to wage theft in writing. If he lied, I had a mountain of documentation proving he was lying. My index finger hovered over the send button. My heart was beating a fast, steady rhythm. Once this email flew through the digital ether, there would be no going back. The line would be drawn. Bill would know, without a doubt, that I was building a case against him. But I was so tired of being afraid. I had done nothing wrong. I had simply stood up for my legal right, not to work for free. I clicked send, the whoosh sound was final. Then I waited. The reply came back within the hour. Short, arrogant, and utterly damning. "Weekend work is unpaid, as we have discussed multiple times. This is standard practice for demonstrating company loyalty and commitment to your team." I read it 3 times, a slow smile spreading across my face. My attorney was going to have a field day with that written confession. The warm morning sunlight spilled across my kitchen table, illuminating the organized stacks of evidence I had laid out like exhibits for a courtroom trial. I had spent most of the night creating multiple, secure copies of everything, uploading encrypted files to a cloud storage service, saving them on 2 different USB drives, and printing out a complete set of physical papers. Each set was meticulously labeled Exhibits A through H. Bill's confession email was printed in a large font and sat right at the top of the first pile. "Weekend work is unpaid, as discussed." Those 7 simple words were the final nail in his professional coffin. I had divided all the evidence into clear, undeniable categories. One stack was all the wage theft documentation, the calendar screenshots, the screen recording, the texts. Another was the retaliation proof, the performance improvement plan, the notes from my firing, the witness accounts from Leah and Leonard. A third was the corporate conspiracy materials, the shocking Slack thread screenshots. Every single document was neatly dated, labeled, and cross-referenced in my master notebook. My phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with a new message. It was from my attorney, Ms. Martins. "Jasmine, I have received and reviewed all the evidence. This is, without exaggeration, the strongest and most well-documented wage theft and retaliation case I have seen in years. We are fully prepared to proceed. Well done." I leaned back in my chair, the wooden legs creaking, and allowed myself a long, deep breath of satisfaction. Just 3 weeks ago, Bill had fired me, publicly shaming me for refusing to work for free. He had stood over my desk, tapped his knuckles, and thought he had won. He thought I would just disappear. But Bill had made one crucial, fatal mistake. He had assumed that because I was quiet, I was powerless. He had confused my silence with weakness, my humility with stupidity. Now, he was about to learn the critical difference between a loyal employee and a willing doormat. The trap had been set with painstaking care, and Manager Bill was about to walk right into it. The attorney's office smelled rich, like old leather books, and a very distinct scent of justice. A crystal pitcher of citrus water sparkled on a side table, catching the light from the large window. My lawyer, Miss Martins, a sharp-eyed woman with a calm but formidable presence, spread my evidence across her immense, polished conference table. Her eyebrows lifted higher and higher with each new document she reviewed. "This is absolutely textbook retaliation," she said, shaking her head in a mix of amazement and disgust. "He has documented his own illegal behavior more thoroughly than we ever could have hoped for in our wildest dreams." She flipped through the printed pages of Bill's Slack messages, his damning confession email, and the calendar screenshots with the delete after instructions. Her expensive pen moved quickly across her legal pad, sketching out our legal strategy in real time as she connected the dots. "We have clear evidence of wage theft, conspiracy to commit wage theft, unlawful retaliation, and possibly even fraud if we can prove he knowingly diverted the allocated overtime by budget for other purposes," she continued, a predatory smile touching her lips. "We're looking at multiple federal labor law violations and several state-level employment law infringements. This is a slam dunk." My heart pounded, a powerful mix of excitement, nerves, and vindication. After weeks of feeling small and powerless, of secretly gathering evidence in the dark, I finally had a powerful, knowledgeable ally, someone with the actual authority and skill to hold Bill and the company accountable. Miss Martins didn't hesitate. She reached for the sleek phone on the conference table. "I'm calling the state labor inspector assigned to this region," she announced. "They are going to want to see this evidence immediately. Trust me, cases this clear don't come across their desk very often." The call connected on the second ring. "Inspector Jones? This is Angela Martins. I have a case involving systematic, documented wage theft and retaliation at Mega Dynamics that I believe will be of significant interest to your office." Through the phone speaker, I heard a woman's crisp, professional voice reply without a moment's hesitation. "I can be there in 1 hour." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The cavalry was officially on its way. The corporate boardroom on the top floor felt more like a courtroom than a place for business meetings. The air was frigid, the lighting was sharp and unforgiving, and the atmosphere smelled of fear thinly masked as professional confidence. I sat straight-backed at one end of the impossibly long, polished mahogany table. Directly across from me, looking much less confident than the last time I'd seen him, sat Manager Bill. Flanked on either side by a pale HR Director Barnes and a stern-looking man in an expensive suit who was introduced as Corporate Legal Counsel Morrison. Labor Inspector Jones, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and a sharp gaze, commanded the room without even raising her voice. Her briefcase was open on the table, displaying my carefully organized evidence binders like an attorney's closing argument. In chairs on the wall behind me sat Leah and Leonard, my 2 brave witnesses, both looking nervous but determined, their hands clasped tightly in their laps. I had placed my chipped World's Best Boss coffee mug on the polished table in front of me. It was the only personal item I had salvaged from my old life, my battle standard, and now it would sit there and witness Bill's final, definitive downfall. "I think we're all present," Inspector Jones said, her voice calm but cutting through the thick tension in the room like a knife. "So, let's begin." Bill shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair, his earlier bravado seeming to evaporate like morning mist. He kept glancing nervously at the evidence display, at the printed Slack messages, probably finally realizing just how much deep, deep trouble he was truly in. Corporate Legal leaned over and whispered something urgently into Barnes's ear, But the inspector held up a single hand, demanding immediate silence. "Mr. Bill," she began, her tone deceptively calm, "we have some very specific questions regarding the official company policy on weekend work and overtime compensation." The room went so completely silent I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the frantic beating of my own heart. It was finally showtime. The projector in the ceiling hummed to life, casting a bright, sharp rectangle of light onto the far wall. With a click, Miss Martins displayed Bill's own delete after calendar entries, blown up to a size that made them impossible to ignore. The evidence looked even more damning, projected for everyone in the room to see simultaneously. Paper rustled as binders full of my documented evidence were passed around the table for the corporate team to inspect, their faces growing grimmer with each page. Inspector Jones, after reviewing the calendar and the threatening texts, asked the one question that made the entire corporate side of the table freeze in place. "For our records, could you please show me your department's budget allocation for overtime compensation for the last 2 quarters?" she asked, her voice neutral. HR Director Barnes, her hands now visibly shaking, had to dial the corporate finance department on the speakerphone in the center of the table. The entire room listened in dead silence as the phone rang. A finance analyst's voice, crisp and professional, came through the speaker. "The Q3 and Q4 overtime reserve for the Quincy Eating Department shows full funding. The budget was approved and allocated as requested by Manager Bill. The funds have not been dispersed to employees, but the money is there." Bill's face went a deathly, ghostly white. The overtime budget existed. The company had actually set aside the money to pay employees for weekend work, but somehow mysteriously that money had never ever reached the workers who had earned it. "So," I said, my voice clear and steady in the stunned quiet, saying the words everyone was now thinking, "if the budget was there to pay us, where did all that money actually go?" The question hung in the cold, recycled air, heavy and accusatory. Bill's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish drowning on dry land. Corporate Legal was now frantically typing notes on his laptop, his forehead shiny with sweat. Barnes stared at the speakerphone as if it had personally betrayed her. Inspector Jones simply waited, her hands steepled, letting the damning silence build until the pressure felt unbearable. The air in the boardroom seemed to turn several degrees colder. The finance analyst, at Inspector Jones's request, forwarded a detailed financial ledger directly to her tablet. We all watched as numbers filled the screen, line items for transfers labeled external contractor reconciliation and vendor services that dated exactly to the weekends we had all been forced to work without pay. The amounts were suspiciously consistent. But the payments hadn't gone to any employees. According to our records, these specific fund transfer approvals all came from Manager Bill's unique login credentials. The finance analyst's voice continued through the speaker, now tight with obvious professional concern. The allocated overtime funds were redirected to a vendor account listed as Strategic Solutions Group. Our initial check shows this vendor has no other contracts with the company. Pens stopped moving around the table. All eyes were locked on the tablet screen, which now clearly showed Bill's digital signature, authorizing these fraudulent transfers. He hadn't just been stealing wages from us, his employees. He had been systematically diverting company funds, the designated overtime budget, to a fake vendor account, one that was almost certainly tied to him personally. Inspector Jones leaned forward, her expression now one of sharp, predatory interest. "This changes the nature of our investigation significantly," she said slowly, letting each word sink in. "This is no longer just a case of wage theft. This has all the Hall Quincy's of embezzlement and corporate fraud." Bill's face had gone from white to a sickly, ashen gray. Sweat beaded on his forehead and upper lip, and he looked like he might be sick right there on the polished table. The full, horrifying scope of his crimes was now out in the open, exposed for everyone to see. He had created a sophisticated scheme to steal from both his employees and his employer. Corporate Legal was already on his cell phone, his voice a low, urgent whisper, undoubtedly calling the company's internal fraud department and probably the police. Barnes looked like she wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. The inspector closed her leather-bound notebook with a sharp, definitive snap. We will be conducting a full forensic audit of all department finances for the last 2 years, she announced to the room. And based on this evidence, we will be formally recommending criminal charges to the district attorney's office. It was over. Bill was finished. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed relentlessly overhead, the sound now the only thing breaking the heavy silence. The man from corporate legal stood up, holding a single sheet of paper, his expression grim and final. The table still smelled faintly of new plastic from the security badge sleeves Barnes had been nervously fiddling with throughout the meeting. Effective immediately, all of Mr. Bill's managerial authority and system access are hereby revoked, pending a full and formal investigation. Legal read from the paper, his voice cold and impersonal. His employment is terminated for cause with immediate forfeiture of all benefits, severance, and outstanding bonuses. As if on cue, Bill's company badge, which had been sitting on the table in front of him, was picked up by legal. It hit the polished wood with a dull final clack that echoed through the silent room. The 2 security officers who had been waiting discreetly outside the door now entered, their presence large and imposing. They moved to stand on either side of Bill's chair. Furthermore, outside counsel added, looking directly at Bill, who seemed to have shrunk in his seat, corporate is filing formal fraud and embezzlement charges against you this afternoon. We will also be notifying the appropriate federal regulators. The FBI's white-collar crime division will be contacted within the hour. I watched, my own heart strangely calm, as Bill's face completely crumbled, the last vestiges of his pride and arrogance dissolving into pure, unadulterated terror. He had gone from a powerful corporate manager to a criminal suspect facing prison time in the span of a single 1-hour meeting. His greedy scheme to steal wages had spectacularly unraveled, revealing the ugly fraud at its core, and now he was facing the consequences. Inspector Jones gathered her evidence files with a look of professional satisfaction. She paused beside my chair on her way out. "Miss Cooper," she said, her voice firm, "my office will be in touch regarding full restitution for you and all other affected employees. You've done a great public service here today." Bill was silently led away by security, his head bowed, his hands being secured behind his back with handcuffs. The man who had demanded loyalty while systematically stealing from his workers was finally, irrevocably, facing the justice he deserved. The system had worked, but only because someone had been brave enough to fight back. The morning sun was warm and gentle on my skin as I sat on a quiet park bench, the sounds of the city a distant murmur. Steam curled up from the coffee in my chipped white mug, the one that had witnessed everything. In my lap, I held a folder containing the final settlement documents from the company. The folder was satisfyingly thick. It contained confirmation of my full back pay, a significant damages payment for the illegal retaliation, the restoration of my benefits, and a formal, written letter of apology signed by the new regional director. Most importantly, it contained proof that the overtime fund was not only real, but was now protected by a new, strict corporate policy requiring dual approvals for any budget transfers and mandatory quarterly audits. Bill's fraud had cost him his freedom. He was now serving a 2-year sentence in a federal prison for embezzlement and wire fraud. My former co-workers, Leah, Leonard, and all the others, had received every cent of their stolen wages, plus interest and additional penalties paid by the company. Leah had sent me a photo of her kids with their new school supplies, their smiles huge. Leonard had finally taken his family on the vacation to the beach they had been dreaming of for years. The victory didn't belong just to me. It belonged to all of us who had refused to be silent. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching people hurry along the paths, probably on their way to jobs. I knew that in some of those offices there were other managers like Bill, other employees being pushed around, being told to work for free, being threatened. Corporate bullies existed everywhere, stealing time and money from workers who were too scared or felt too powerless to fight back. My phone, sitting next to me on the bench, buzzed again with a new message from a former colleague from a different department, asking for advice on how to handle a similar situation. Word was spreading, a quiet network of empowerment, teaching people how to document workplace abuse and fight back through the proper legal channels. If anyone ever asks you to work for free, I said softly to the peaceful morning air, as if speaking to all of them, start a folder, take a screenshot, save a text, and always, always ask where the budget for your pay really went. The fight was won. My personal battle was over, but I knew the larger war for basic worker rights and dignity was far from over. I looked down at the steam rising from my old mug, the one that had been with me through it all, the late nights, the betrayal, the fight, and now, the peace. I thought about the woman I was just a few months ago, the one who trembled when her boss looked at her, the one who believed she had no power. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who understood that power isn't always about a title on a door. Sometimes it's in a notebook, a screenshot, a saved email. It's in the truth, patiently gathered and bravely presented. I thought of you listening to this story. Maybe you're on your way to work right now, dreading the day. Maybe you're sitting at your desk feeling small and unheard. Maybe you've just been told to be a team player and work for free this weekend. I want you to know something. You are not powerless. They might try to define you by what you lack, a fancy title, a big salary, the courage to speak up. They might try to measure your worth by their own shallow, selfish standards. Let them. Your pain, your frustration, your quiet anger, that is your fuel. Your struggle, the silent work you do to rebuild your confidence after they've torn it down, that is your forge. Use it. Build your own empire of self-respect, piece by piece. Not for the moment they finally see it and have to acknowledge you, but for the day you look in the mirror and finally, truly, see the person they never could. An asset. Your own. And no one can ever take that away from you.